Okay, we're live. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, and we will jump in. So I want to read a section. We're going to start off with a section from Sefer Eov and Perek Chav Ches. So the narrator, who is at this point at this particular chapter, is Eov himself. He says the following: Ki yesh lakesef motza. There is a source where silver can be found. The makom lezahav yizoku, and also a place where can be hewn gold. Barzel me'afar yukach. It is known that you can find iron in the dirt. Ve'even yatzuk nechusha, and similarly you can find stones with which to fashion copper. Kates sam lachosha lechol tachlis hu choker. God, this is a description of Hashem and his relationship to the full spectrum of reality. That God puts an end to all darkness, and any goal or any initiative he is aware of. What this is saying is, in a very, very poetic and abstract way, that the source of anything in the world is known by Hashem, and also we can relate to that a little bit as well. Just like God knows the source of any material or any finished product, right? Because copper isn't a finished product. You find minerals in the ground, and then you purify those minerals, and then you produce it. Similarly with silver. So just like we can do that, or really it's the opposite comparison. Just like God is aware of the full spectrum of things in creation, so too we also can relate to that a little bit. We know the source of gold. What's the source of gold? You go into a mine, you pick at the walls a little bit, and you find a piece of You find a piece of stone with gold in it, and then you go through the smelting process to extract the gold, and you end up with a gold bar eventually. Right? So continues the pasuk. The psukim go on with this theme for a few more psukim, and then in pasuk Yud Beis, the Navi says the following: the hachachma, however, in contrast to all of these things that we do know the source of and we do know the origins of, hachachma, wisdom, me'ayin timatzei, where is it from? The Eza Makom Bina, and where is the place of understanding? Lo Yoda Enosh Erka, there is no man that knows its full nature or its full essence. V'lo Timatzei Be'eretz HaChaim, and is not known in the land of the living. Tahomar Lo Bihi. You call out to the depths and you say, "Is Chachma by you?" The depths will say, "No, it's not by me." Right? Lo Bihi. It's not in me. V'Yam Omar, and if you call out to the oceans and say, "Do you happen to have a Chachma down there?" The Yam will say, "Eini Madi." It's not by me. So no one knows where Chachma is. You want to know where gold is? We know where gold is. You want to know where iron is? You know where iron is. You want to know where this is? We know where everything is. No one knows where Chachma is. No one knows where Chachma is from. Okay? Az Ra'ah v'Yisapra. I'm skipping forward a few more psukim. However, in the end of the matter, it will be told. Hachina v'gam chakara. If you prepare yourself and you investigate the matter thoroughly, vayomar, and it will be said la'adam, to man, hein yiras Adonai hi chachma. The fear of God, that's wisdom. V'sor merah bina, and removing oneself from evil, that is understanding. So we see the progression over here. That's the end of the whole parak. Right? We just did a skira. We just did a condensation of the entire chapter. Obviously, the details they matter significantly. We only did 5 out of the 28 verses, but this is the theme of this parak. Eov is declaring that the nature of reality is that we can see the finished product of all things, and we know where it began and where it ends. We can examine the world, and we can know with our conscious mind how that works. There's one exception to this. The exception to this is Chachma, or more specifically, Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina, no one knows where it's from, no one knows where it comes from, no one knows where it came from, no one knows how to get it. No one knows. And the only advice that you can be given, it says if you want to find Chachma, so it's Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem is Chachma, and to refrain from evil, that's where you'll get Bina. It's a shame that I didn't bring this sefer with me, but there is a very, very important work that was produced by Rav Saadia Gaon, who lived about 1,100 years ago in Egypt, and he wrote a commentary to a very, very fundamental sefer in Jewish thought, in the pantheon of Jewish thought, perhaps the oldest book that we have, older than the Tanakh itself, a sefer that the Gemara refers to, called Sefer HaYetzirah. Rav Saadia Gaon himself, in the introduction, says that we have a tradition that at least the seminal text of this book was in some way connected to Avraham Avinu. And in this book, he has an analysis of these psukim. What is going on when it says everyone knows how the origins of everything and the process of refinement and how it comes to its goal. When it comes to wisdom, no one knows how that works.
We're separating wisdom from knowledge, right?
So he defines. So first he's got to define what that means. When the prophet says "Al chachma me'ayin timatzei," where are you finding it? What is this chachma that he's referring to? That no one knows what it is. He says the chachma that it's talking about is the way in which the divine intention manifests itself in the nature of being, or what we would call today the laws of nature, the laws of science. He says science, right? He doesn't use his words, obviously. He says the philosophers and those who are choker, they investigate reality, they can trace cause and effect. They can trace it all the way back. But at some point, they get to a point where they can't explain the phenomenon. They can't explain. Right? He speaks in the language of the four humors, right? Right? Fire, earth, wind, and water. Right? That was the scientific conception back in the day. That these are four categories of material matter. They're not even material matter. They're the precursors of material matter. They're material matter coming into being, and they have natures. Right? Fire is hot and it's ethereal and it rises up. Water, on the other hand, is wet and it has a downward motion. All these different characteristics. These are the precursors of what we would call the laws of physics. How to make observations at the very, very fundamental layer of reality and come to the most basic understanding that we can. Right? All things are subject to gravity. All things are subject to the strong force, right, of the nucleus of atoms. All things in nature are subject to these laws. But at a certain point, you dig deep down, as deep as you can go. There's no more explanation. You say, well, this is because of this is because of that, but you can't get past that. Everyone is trying to understand the ultimate why, perhaps what's come to be known today as like the theory of everything. What is the ultimate reason why things are the way they are? Everyone's trying to investigate this. In the same manner that well, this gold bar used to be a few specks of gold in the rock, and that rock used to be in the bedrock at the bottom of a mine. And then a worker came in and detached it from the wall and went through this whole process, and that's how we have it. They want to understand the nature of being itself. That same way, that the gold bar came from the mine. So too, how did being itself come to be the way that it is?
So this is wisdom.
This is wisdom as it's being used in this in this parak. So says Rav Saadia Gaon, this is what it means when it says "Hachachma me'ayin timatzei." No one can actually come to a final conclusion, to a final thorough understanding of why this is. At a certain point, they'll just have to say, "This is just how it is. It's just how it is. We don't know." Right? Now, to zoom out a little bit, what's the context in which these verses are being said? What's the ultimate context of Sefer Eov? Ultimate context of Sefer Eov is a person who knows that he's a righteous man. He knows he's a good guy. In fact, the book says he's a good guy. And he's experiencing this horrible, horrible suffering. So when it says the nature of reality, it's not only talking about from a scientific perspective, but it's also talking about from a theological or a spiritual perspective. That's the background to everything that's being said. So we want to understand, man, ayin timatzei, how are we going to understand? How are we going to come to an understand of God's will manifesting itself in the world? So he says, if you want to understand it in the same way that you understand the source of how raw materials eventually produce a finished product, you're not going to be able to understand it. There's no definitive source for this. There's no definitive endpoint where you come and say, oh, so now I got it. However, the only hope that you have, Vayomer la'adam, Azra Ava Yisapra, at the end of it all, this is what you can say. Vayomer la'adam, and you can say to man, Hein yiras Hashem hi chachma, that the fear of the divine, that's a place where you can get wisdom. Vesur me'rabina, and refraining from evil, being in a state of consciousness where you are constantly aware of the possibility of falling into depravity, that's bina. That's the place, so to speak, where it's possible to access it.
Can we say that anything that is affecting us in an evil way is in a simpler terms is simply taking us farther away from Chachma? That's the thing. Say
it one time. Well,
so there's the wisdom, like acknowledging the wisdom of that Hashem is basically the source of everything. Or Hashem is the Yiras Shammai, which I would imagine if you dive a little bit deeper, is basically you're coming to understand Hashem is basically one running the whole world. That's basically what it might come down to in your own mind. You dig further than Yiras Shammai, but And then anyway, then we have Chet, right? Then we have the thing that and Bina is that which you're saying how we have to worry about things that are gonna corrupt us. So could we say that Chet is basically anything that would take us farther away from Hashem? Would that be maybe I'm just kind of using.
I think that a good definition of all hate are things that take you further away from Hashem. But here, I think the point of what's being said is that if a person wants to gain the deepest understandings that they can of reality, a full frontal assault is not going to work. Meaning, directly looking for it, it's not going to work. The only hope that a person has is to live a life oriented in this way, i.e., Yiras Shamayim, awe of the divine, and guarding themselves from evil. Living in that way will bring a person close to Chachma and Bina. That's what it's saying. Investigating it in the same way that you investigate any other scientific endeavor will not work. But living in this way will work. That's what it's saying. Huh? Oh, there you go. Hey, right. Yeah. So in this little section that we're referring to, Rav Sajagon makes brilliant connections between two other places in Tanakh, in Mishlei, which you just mentioned, and also in Sefer Koheles, which has a series of psukim that really, really resemble this. It asks the question, where are we getting wisdom from? There's no place to get it. In fact, Koheles ends off with the verse, right? Sof davar kol nishma. And at the end of the day, all you can say, it sounds like a very it sounds like a very anticlimactic verse. Like in the end of the day, all you can say, just be a good person, right? No, what it's saying is that a lifetime of directly pursuing this type of knowledge will not get you anywhere. But living in a certain way, oriented to a certain way, will get you somewhere.
Well, I've probably been from studying the world.
So I would augment that a little bit. It doesn't say that he got that from observing the world. He arrived at the conclusion that idolatry was false by observing the world. That's what it says.
Really?
That's what it says, right? In Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, when it discusses his development, right? He said idolatry is clearly wrong from what I observe in the world. And then, as the Medrash Rabbah says, he experienced, right, how you shtei klayosav malamdim oso kishtei rabosav. It was like his very organs themselves began to flow with the spirit of holiness, and he received this divine inspiration. But the whole thing of observing nature was coming to the conclusion that idolatry was false. That's not the same as receiving like the direct.
Those who find the why,
Huh?
those who find the why can share it.
Those who find
The answer to the why.
the answer,
Can share it.
they can share it to people, but it's the sharing in the same. It's not the share. It's not necessarily the sharing of direct knowledge. It's the sharing of what is the way to get to the knowledge. It's like the Ramchal says in the introduction to Mesilas Yesharim. It says that if a person is walking through a maze, so how do you walk through a maze? You ask someone. You ask the last guy who successfully walked through it. He can tell you. That's not the same thing as leapfrogging you to the end of the maze.
Right.
Yeah, it's saying what are the ways of conduct in which a person can arrive at that.
Yeah, kind of correct. He said, "You're at Hashem is knowing that God runs the world."
Well, again, I didn't say it exactly, but
Oh, now you're saying
It's not
necessarily.
necessarily.
I said if you dig deeper beyond Yira, if you go through beyond Yira, then it must be that Hashem runs the world. That must be it.
I just want to unpack this concept a little bit. There's a Zohar which is relatively well known in Chelik Beis of the Zohar, Perek Kuf Chaf Aleph. Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph. Right? The Zohar says the following. Is this the right page? Yes, it is. Nofkas. It says in the pasuk in Eov, where do we find wisdom? It says the Zohar, Oraisa michachma nofkas. The Torah was an emanation out of this entity or this domain called wisdom. Me'atar de'ikri kodesh, or as otherwise referred to, this domain of wisdom is in other instances referred to as kodesh. V'hachachma nofkas me'atri de'ikri kodesh hakadoshim. And wisdom itself emanates out from the place called the holies of holies. What does this mean, Oraisa michachma nofkas, that the Torah, as we know it, emanated out from chachma? It is literally the pshat of the psukim that we just read, that the Torah emanates out from wisdom. People are searching for wisdom. They want to know wisdom. You can't get wisdom, but what you can do is live in Yiras Shamayim and Sor Meirah. That will get you wisdom. Looking for wisdom directly won't get you wisdom, but living in Yiras Shamayim and Sur Meirah will get you Chachma and Bina. It's the pshat of the psukim. When the Zohar says Oraisa michachma novgaz, that's literally what it's saying. You want the Torah is an emanation of God's wisdom. So going through the motions of the Oraisa of the Torah will eventually reveal, right? It will eventually reveal that wisdom. Yeah. So as we talked about last time in Os Kuf, and we're going to see how Reish is really just a direct segue into Reish, and Rav Kook makes that explicit in the very first line. So as we talked about the last time, there's the unconscious rote, and then there's the rote where you open up your mind to some semblance of awareness. You say, I don't know what's going on, but I have my eyes and ears open. So I'm going through rotes because I'm not advanced enough to understand the significance of it, but I'm going through the motions with my eyes and ears open to being able to receive the messages. That's right.
Like
that's the right. It's mamash wax on, wax off. Thank you. I'm glad I was thinking it and you said it. So something that Rav Sadia Gaon adds, which I think is in some ways even more powerful. The comment in the Mishnah in Sefer Yetzirah that he's commenting on says this very cryptic idea that God created the world with the Lamed Beis Nesivos with the 32 pathways, Plios Chachma, of wondrous wisdom, Plios Chachma. So it says Rav Sadia Gaon, why is it referring to Plios Chachma? What's this Plios Chachma? What is the wondrous wisdom? The wisdom that's beyond. He says because at another time, Moshe Rabbeinu, in his parting speech to the Jewish people, he says to the Jewish people that the thing that I'm giving you now is not Plios. Lo nifleisi mimcha. It is not far from you. Ki haTorah azos, this Torah, lo nifleisi mimcha v'lo rechokahi, and it's not far. Lo me'ever layami, it's not on the other side of the sea, right? It's kikar lecha hadavar me'od. It's very close to you. Beficha u'v'lavcha la'asoso, in your heart and in your mouth, so that you may do it, right? So if you go a direct search for chachma, it's pliya. It's very far away. But the Torah is not very far away. The Torah is right here. And if you focus on what's right here, then you will get ipso facto the access to the thing that's very, very far away. And that's why the Mishnah refers to it as plios chachma, because it's fundamentally far, right? It's nifleis, right? It's like Yaakov says to Yosef, Ra'o panecha lo pilalti. I never dreamed that I would see your face. Like, it was just way off the radar of possibility that I would ever see your face. That's plios chachma. It's just totally off the radar, not within the realm of comprehension. But the Torah is not like that. The Torah is right here. It's right here. It's very, very close. So by accessing this thing, which is extremely close, so you can get to the thing which is so far away that it's literally inaccessible.
Yeah.
So with it, sure.
I think what's not obvious here is what you was saying and what you're trying to say. And that is Yiras Hashem, right? Hitisalo and all the psukim that we have is what's required, but it's the first step. And the rest of the steps is what we would call Avodas Hashem and life. And everything, just to say that it's automatic, for sure not. Correct?
Right.
You'll agree with me there.
So yeah.
And where Reish is taking us, I don't know. But I think in the other letters as well, it's not obvious. And the ability to where Chachma turns into Seichel or wisdom, I'm looking for another word besides Chachma. Because in Chachma B'Das,
Chachma knowledge maybe?
No.
It's inspiration,
it's whatever takes us into building a relationship with God. I think that's what Ian is telling us. And that's a lifelong, how did you call it? Wax on, wax off. But it's not automatic. We have to see behind.
I'll strengthen what you're saying. The parak starts off very explicitly by framing the approach to which the person is trying to take towards wisdom. We know that gold comes from here. We know that copper comes from here. We know that this comes from there. Okay, so where's wisdom? Tell me where it is, and I'll go and I'll pick it up. Like you go to the store, you pick up
you can
thing of
lead,
eggs, right?
Lead a horse to water.
Wisdom. So what it's saying is wisdom doesn't work that way. Right. It's not the same thing. It's not like you know where this object is, where this item is, and you go and you pick it up and then you have it. Wisdom is not that way. Ella, rather, Yiras Hashem hi chachma. It's orienting oneself to a certain pattern of existence.
Orienting oneself.
It's right. It's the orientation. It's the self-orientation. It's not going to a place and picking it up in the same way that you pick up gold, silver, copper, whatever. But it's the self-orientation that allows that to be achieved. So this just highlights the point that you're saying. It's not. Oh, now I know, and now I picked it up, and that's the end of the process. No, on the contrary, it is the process. This is right. This is the path.
It is a process.
Correct.
That's what he's talking
Talk about the guy that they can't achieve, they can't get the first base, they can't get the zero.
Why can't Chachma have Yiras Hashem? Why can't the non-Jews have Yiras Shamayim? I mean, it talks about Eob. Eob was a non-Jew. It says he was a God-fearing person. The midrash that I think you're referring to, the midrash that I think you're referring to is the midrash in the beginning of Eicha Rabbah, where it says that Im Tomer Lecha Chachma Be'umos, if someone tells you that there's wisdom amongst the nations, Ta'amein. Im Tomer Lecha Torah Be'umos, but if someone says that there's Torah amongst the nations, Al Ta'amein. Do not believe them. Those are the distinction between Chachma and Torah. I think that in light of this, we can give somewhat of a definition that the Chachma is the general orientation that is, like Daniel described, the fact that God runs the world, the fact that we need to orient ourselves in fearing that divine source, in distancing ourselves from things that damage us. That can be defined as Chachma. But Oraisa, the specific practices that mold someone to be more and more exposed to that truth and cleave onto that truth, as those very psukim that we were talking about before in Zever Devarim, right? The dovak tabo, that the goal of the Torah is to achieve a state where one is cleaved on to the divine source. So that al tameh, don't believe them. If they say that level is in the nations, don't believe them. There's more to say on the distinction of Torah versus Chachma, but I think that if we're going to take the definitions that we're talking about now, I think that it does at least map on. I do, but probably the examples that I have you don't want to hear. We could.
Now we do
want
Yeah, if we have time at
Just
that.
worded it wrong. No.
You just ate her.
Exactly.
So we'll get him after.
So let's jump into the text. It's not particularly long. The Reish. So we have to use some of the tools that we got. Sorry. Yeah. Understand.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good observation. The answer is yes, as you will see in a moment.
This is the title, as opposed to ours.
Yeah. So we'll get there. We're getting there. So Hakofiyut, the monkeyism, as Ovadia coined for us last time, right? The Kofism, yeah. Va'itchakut, and the mimicking, shehu yesod ha'ataka shel hatziyurim, which is the foundation of all ability for the forms to copy themselves or to copy each other. Hamusagim, hakochot, hamifalim ba'tnuot, all the forces, all the actions, the initiatives, and the movements. Sorry,
we're talking here about cell replication as well.
Oh, we did the whole conversation last time on Kofiyut, on the negative manifestation of copying, positive manifestation of copying. Right, that was all oskuf, the monkey, right, the monkey nature. Or the primate nature, which sees something and can copy it, who can just see and learn in that way.
The ability of him to get to touch this idea is unbelievable.
And that imprints on you, right?
Hamishpatim, hashifot, v'idealim, all the aspirations and all the ideals, mimeromei mekorioteim, from the loftiness of their originality, letachtit hamshachat hachayim v'hametziut b'chukeim, all the way down to the lowest levels of drawing down life into reality, which is those lines are basically a summation of oskuf. That oskuf is the ability for anyone who's even on the lowest of the low. He can't understand anything, but what he can do is at least observe and copy exactly what he saw. He can see and do, right? So that ability. He goremet shachrei hakoach haklali hazeh yuchal koach matchil. What comes from that afterwards, after someone is in that state of copying, meaning observing what he wants to be like, what he wants to emulate. Thank you. What he wants to emulate, and being in that state of learning. So what comes from that, the next stage that is a direct product of that, is the power of beginnings. It starts off. It's a serial force, serial like a series of. Okay, but surah tirgumit. It begins its process in the form of the targum. Now, if you remember, this is already in Os Aleph, we touched on this point. the difference between, right, in Rav Kook's conception, and it's not just Rav Kook, but Rav Kook uses this idea heavily, the difference between Lashon HaKodesh and Lashon Arami, or Targum, Lashon Targum. So the difference between Lashon HaKodesh and Lashon Targum is that Lashon HaKodesh speaks to the thing about what the thing is in an explicit way. Lashon HaKodesh describes the thing in an explicit way. And the Targum, Aramaic, describes what the thing is, but in the way that the unconscious would describe it. It hasn't yet come to explicit articulation yet. It's still being formed.
Well, it's Aleph.
This is what we talked about This is what we talked about in Os Aleph about the Tardema. The Tardema, the slumber, the deep slumber, this phenomenon that comes up only twice in the whole Torah, that Adam and later Avraham, they fall into this Tardema, where they get an insight into something which has yet to play out fully. It's just the beginnings of the things emerging into conscious, or let's say manifest experience, fully manifested experience. So that's called the Tardema. And Tardema and Tirgum, they have the same numeric value, which alludes to this idea.
And Reish is the actual
So
beginnings of acting out.
So he's getting to this, right? Ha'acharanit, right? The other way of looking at that idea is looking at the thing from behind. Like we talked about how, like when God says
Tashrak.
what?
Tashrak.
Tashrak. That's a similar idea. It's a similar idea, right? The idea of looking at the behind or at the backside of the thing, like God says to Moshe, "You can't see my face." Right? You can see the back of my face. Upanai lo yaro, but you can't see the front of my face. So the experience, fundamentally, the experience of the divine, since the nature of the divine is fundamentally beyond our nature, right? It's like trying to understand what living outside of time would be like. It's not something accessible. So any access that we have is seeing the back of God's face. It's not seeing the front of God's face. And again, there's a distinction between Lashon HaKodesh, which is an explicit, articulated description of the thing, as opposed to Targum, which is the unexplicit, the beginnings of emergence of conscious awareness, but it's not explicit. Haresh, hu harosh ha'ivri miturgam. The word resh is the Hebrew word rosh, but just in Aramaic. Resh in Aramaic, resh yud resh, right? That word, excuse me, resh yud shin. That word means rosh in Aramaic. It means the beginnings. Mikomo achar hakuf mevutzar hulo. And its natural place is immediately following the kuf. Hu inyano moshech et meshach hachayim mimikoram kahavav. In one form of the letter, meaning the right hand side, the vertical line, it is the idea of it symbolizes the drawing down of life force in the same way that we talked about that in Os Vav. That Vav symbolizes the drawing down, the connection between a higher state and a lower state, or said in the opposite way, bringing up the lower state of existence to a higher state of existence. We talk about Vav. Vav literally means to connect, right? To hook something onto something else. Which is basically when you write the resh, or when you write a Vav, you start off with the infinitesimal yud, right? The theoretical dot, which has no expression at all, and then you draw it down lower, so you connect the ideal to the more manifest concrete reality. That's Os Vav. Aval hu boneh binyano hamavusas al yesod ha'ataka. However, the resh is different from the Vav because it's really formed. He says the beginning of its form, and by the beginning of its form, what does he mean? The way you write resh, you don't do the vertical part first. You write the horizontal part, the top horizontal line. You write first, and then you go down to the lower part, meaning the lower right part. Okay, so the tchila, the beginning of the resh, is a ha'ataka, is a disconnect. It's a disconnect. Why is it a disconnect? So as we've talked about, I think we encountered this idea the first time in Os Beis, that the idea of a thick horizontal line is the idea of creating a boundary between you and the upper world. The Beis is already, right, the Beis, the bayit, the kli, the vessel, is already creating it's creating a disconnect from the source for the purpose of giving the person more self-identity, right? That's the bias. If a person is constantly connected to their source without any level of independence, they can't develop, they can't flourish. So this thick line on top is symbolizing that. It's like the very beginnings of the Os Beis is this thick horizontal line which is cutting off from the source, intentionally cutting off from the source. it strengthens its place by constructing this upper line, hachotzeitz, which causes a separation, yafeh bin ha'arot ha'mekorim uveino, from the lights that are its source to itself. It wants to separate itself from the lights of its source. It's intentionally separating itself from its own source. And then draws down its strength into itself to reveal the power of its own life in action, right? Which is just another way of saying that the horizontal line, which is this thick separation of its from between it and its source, then is drawn down in the vertical line to act and manifest itself independently. So we see that this idea is expressed also in where it comes in the progression of the letters and its name, right? Its name Resh, and how it's actually written, right? In the actual form of the letter. And when it's separated, miyasodo, miyasod ha'ataka ha'me'ula, from its foundations, which is its separation from the lofty, hatochen hakofi hametuhar b'ne'edar b'kodesh, which was the kofi, the monkeyness, right? The monkeyness which was oriented towards holiness, i.e., what's the monkeyness oriented towards holiness? Copying for the sake of becoming better, practicing, being able to learn, being able to model. Harehu shoresh haresha hamuchan liyisagev yesha b'shuvo el al tov ma'od ze yetzer hara. So we'll get to that in a moment. What is he says? He says this is able to address the root of all evil, which is what Chazal say, Tov Ma'od, in the final Tov Ma'od of the creation. When it says Tov Ma'od, God saw creation, saw that it was very good. So the Midrash Rabbah says, what's Ma'od? Zu Yetzer Hara. Tov, Zu Yetzer Tov. Ma'od, very good, Zu Yetzer Hara.
Okay, no,
So we'll get there in a minute. So let's unpack that for a second. First of all, Rav Kook makes very clear, literally from the first line, that this is a natural progression from the kuf. So what is the positive manifestation of the kuf? Well, let's start with the negative manifestation of the kuf. The negative manifestation of the kuf, as we said, is copying just for the sake of copying. And as Rav Kook said, the negative copying means that the person is completely unaware of their own superficiality. They're just seeing the externals and they're saying, okay, as long as my externals look like those externals, I'm good. The person is not even aware of shitchiyuteha, of its own superficiality. That's the negative. However, the positive kofiyut is that you see something that you want to emulate, and you see how that thing conducts itself. We talked about the idea of Ma'aser Rav, about how when someone learns from their teacher, they're always looking for the action of the Rav. They're not just seeing the words of their teacher, but they're also looking at how the teacher conducts themselves, and that's the primary way of how someone is meant to study Torah. So when a person copies and emulates in that way, that is the kuf of kedusha, right? The kuf of holiness. However, once a person goes through that process of the kuf of holiness, then it's able to generate a resh, to generate a beginning. Okay, the beginning, which is independent. The person now becomes their own independent thing, and that's why the resh, according to Rav Kook, the resh is written in Aramaic and not in Lashon HaKodesh, because it's not an explicit beginning. It's a beginning that just emerges out of itself without even thinking about it. After the person has practiced over and over and over and gone through the process of emulation and gone through the process of observing his ideal and just trying to be like that ideal without giving too much thought to their own independence, what naturally and organically emerges from that is the resh, their sense of complete independence. Is it their own style, their own twist on the thing, the resh or the rosh. Yeah?
Because in order to create, I have to have that separation to allow me to grow into my own creativity.
No, 100%. I'll tell you this is right in the halachic in the halachic context. This is expressed in a very interesting way. The Torah talks about the prohibition of a disciple, even if they have the credentials and they're competent enough of giving a halachic ruling in front of their own master. And I'll give a halachic ruling. Right? We learn that from a few places. We learned that from Nadav and Avihu, that was one of their sins. They gave a halachic ruling, even though they were fully competent to do so. They gave a halachic ruling in the presence of Moshe and Aaron, which is what they should not have done. So one of the stipulations to that in the Gemara in Eruvin, it says that if the student is not in the vicinity of the master. So what does that mean practically? As the Rishonim explain, I believe the Ravid brings this. This is brought in Shulchan Aruch and Yerodea in Siman Reish Mem Ches, if I'm not mistaken. You can check me on that. It's certainly Reish Mem something. Anyway, so he says that. So what does that mean? It means that this is the process of the student becoming independent. Right. Until that point, he was in his master's Beit Midrash. He was learning from him. So to be in the master's Beit Midrash and to give over your own halachic ruling is not appropriate. It's very inappropriate to do that. But the second you leave, you geographically locate yourself to another place. Now you've declared you're independent. Of course, the master has to give that okay. He has to give you the green light. That's the whole point, right? That's the whole smicha thing that I think we've talked about in other contexts, right? The significance of smicha. The master saying now you can be in my place. Right, that's symbolically, but anyway, be that as it may, the point is that once the disciple is now in a physical location outside of where the master is, it's okay for him to give his own rule. This is the hataka. Yeah. Pull that thread a little bit. So what Yoni is referring to, the Gemara, the pasuk in Sefer Malachim Days tells the story of the wicked king of the northern kingdom, Achav, who was debating whether or not to go to war, and he was doing that in collaboration with the king of Yehuda, which was a righteous king, Yehoshaphat. And Yehoshaphat recommended that they inquire from a prophet whether or not they should go. So Achav brings in his team of 400 prophets. He has 400 prophets there. Okay, whether 400 is an exact number, it means literally 400. It means a big group of prophets. So they all come in and they all say, "Yep, the king should go, and you're going to be successful, and it's all going to work out well." So says the Gemara. So say Chazal on that on this story. You see, from that description that they were all lying. Why? Because if you have a whole group, it sounds very simple. Right? It's like the two Jews, three opinions type of thing. It's like this is the source for that. It's like if you have a huge group of prophets and they're all saying exactly the same thing, you know that they're lying. You know that it's not true, right? So as Yoni says, Ki ein shnei neviim misnabnin besignon echad. Because there's no two prophets that prophesize in the same style. There's no such thing as two prophets in the same style. So if they're saying the exact same thing, you know that they're Nevi'ah Sheker. That's a telltale sign. Yeah. So as we were saying before, this is the categorical shift, because the ha'ataka, as we were saying, right, the ha'ataka, the copying, the mimicking that we were saying before, the whole theme of the copying is to be exact. Right? If you don't copy something in an exact way, you've ruined it, especially with things that require fine tuning and things that are trying to integrate with other things. If you deviate even slightly, you're going to mess up the whole thing. So the whole point of copying is to not. You don't want to have your own flavor of a train track, right? As we were talking about before. No, you want to do exactly like the other train track. That's when you exactly like the same thing. Yeah. However, after the ha'ataka process, after the copying process has run its course, right? But the thing that he's emphasizing, and I want to emphasize this again, even though I think we said it before. What's interesting to point out is that that the reish here, the beginnings, is a reish in the tardema mode. It's an unconscious reish. It's the beginnings that emerge without consciously thinking that that's what you want to do. It's not like the person comes to a point and says, "Oh, now I'm going to go out on my own." That's not what happens. It organically just happens. The race just flows.
Like a child developing after he learns how to speak or walk or play, and then he begins to manifest his own characters almost without any thinking about it.
Right. So the child doesn't say, "Okay, I've copied my older siblings for long enough now, right. And now I can build my own version of Legos." It's not. It doesn't say that. It just happens, right? It just happens. So similarly, right? Yeah. Who wanted to say something?
Clearly show that the Hebrew and Aramaic one is more definitive and one is just like more material or something like that. Is this something? Can you bring that down to like a level that you're?
I don't think I understood the question.
Because you said the word that reish instead of rosh, it's reish because Aramaic and Hebrew are different. One is more concrete and one is more pre-thought or pre.
Lashon HaKodesh is more explicit,
right.
And Aramaic is not explicit. It's the struggling to articulate without being able to be explicit.
Is there any example give us or you say, oh yeah, now I see it. Like is there any
Example of what? What he's.
I told you, Reish and Rosh. I get it. Reish is before you articulate something.
I guess.
I don't think it's contained. I don't think you can draw this theme from any two. I mean, maybe there are. I'm sure there are in Lashon HaKodesh where the subtle differences in connotation that there are. We talked about 2 weeks ago. We talked about an os nun. We're talking about how there's dag and nun. Yeah, dag is fish and nun is fish in Aramaic, and how nun it's like this double entendre of fish and also the letter nun, which is Lashon HaKodesh and Aramaic express that. I don't know. I mean, Reish and Rosh are pretty similar, right? So I don't know if you could draw such a distinction, this tension. What he's talking about is the general pattern of what Lashon HaKodesh symbolizes as such. Lashon HaKodesh as such is the grasp of the thing in a fully articulated, clear manner. Whereas Aramit, the Targum, the translation, is always the beginnings of emergence of a consciousness able to be articulated. That state, as we said, it's called slumber. It's the state of sleep. It's like sleeping, being awake. It's like you're dreaming. The beginnings of the understanding of thing, but not really understanding. You can, right? The idea is that the phenomenon of Ra, and specifically the Yetzer Hara in the person, right? As Solzhenitsyn between good and evil runs between the heart of every man. It's not like these are the bad guys and these are the good guys. No, the line is inside of you. So he said, right, the evil that emerges from the person is that Ra is the capacity for the person to be their own person. The Ra is the capacity for the person to be their own person. How faction? But the Ra is just all this is the right. Well, we're doing this is not the book to read in casual, right? While you're operating heavy machinery.
Like that's something to sit and just ponder about for a few days.
So this is what he's saying. The reish is after the person has been in the kof mode of just copying, completely not self-aware, just looking outward and following in this very rote way. Eventually, they achieve a place where there's a beginning, and a beginning in the sense that of independence and self-expression in the most fundamental way. It's this very thick line that's separating you from your source. Boom, separating, and then you start drawing down and acting in accordance with that independence. And the shorash hara, right, the tov ma'od zu yetzer hara, the very good, not just good that there are palm trees and squirrels and killer whales and all this beautiful stuff. That's just good. That's just garden variety good. The tov ma'od is the yetzer hara aspect of the bria, which is the fact that the bria can be their own thing. They can go their own course. They don't need to be tied to their source and have the proverbial hand holding the whole time.
We were set up from the beginning, though.
Malachim versus human beings. Malachim could be tov, but they're stuck.
So
that's tested. They can't
right.
grow from. They can't grow from it because they know it hurts.
So there's a lot to say on this point. I'll just insert one thought. The Maharal says in Derech Chaim, his commentary on Pirkei Avos, Masechet Avos, he says that this is why angels are given animalistic characteristics. They have wings, and in Sefer Yechezkel they look like different animals. Right? Why is that? Because their orientation is animal-like, not animal-like like animalistic, materialistic. They're animals in that they have a nature and they abide by that nature. Right? A cow doesn't decide one day he wants to go up to read the classics at Oxford. He doesn't do that. He says I want to eat grass. That's what I want to do. Right? Human beings are not like that. They choose their own path. Right? Like Maharal says another place in Tiferes Yisrael, behema, animal, is ba-ma. What it is what it is. Whatever is in it is what it is. Right? Adam, as we learn in Bereshis, as like the earth, whatever you put in it, that's what's going to grow. Right? But this idea of the shoresh hara, there's one thought. The Gemara in Sanhedrin records several conversations between Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Antoninus. There's the question of who Antoninus was. Some people say it was the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Some say it was more a local guy between this Roman official and Rabbi. And one of the conversations that they have is, when does the evil inclination come into a person? Is it at conception or is it at birth? Meaning, do you have this, does the woman have this little, demon festering inside her womb, or is it only once it's born, then the Yetzer Hara enters the child? So Antoninus says, this is Antoninus speaking, says, I'll bring you a proof that it's only from, it's for sure from birth. for sure from birth. It's not from conception. It's from birth. That's an interesting conversation, what that midrash means. But the Gemara says explicitly that the Yetzer Hara does not come in this conversation. It says that the Yetzer Hara does not come in until birth. How do we know? Because it says if the Yetzer Hara was in the child while it was in conception, it would kick its way out of its mother's womb. What does that mean? The Yetzer Hara, in its source, in its most fundamental definition, is the desire to be independent. That's what it means. Get me out of here. Why am I in this womb? Why am I hooked up to this thing? Get me out of here. That is the root of the Yetzer Hara. Before the child can do anything, it just wants to get out of the womb. That's the Yetzer Hara. And that's why the Yetzer Hara needs to wait until it's out of that development, because it needs that in order to live. Right? That development you can't skip. Pregnancy you can't skip. Yeah. So this is the idea. The reish, the beginnings, right, which are albeit just beginnings, right? Because it's not it's not the conscious decision to now start and move, right, have your own trek forward. It's the beginnings that emerge after a long process of copying, learning, and receiving, and just emulating, right? But it's the beginnings that is the tikkun, as Rav Kook says, is the correction of the shoresh hara, of the foundations of all evil. The independence being a good thing, the independence of being able to, right, give your own flavor, your own twist, your own spin on the thing, which is how you were created.
Wax on, wax off. Basically, there's a karate movie.
Show you the word
older karate master trying to teach this younger kid karate.